There are a number of milestones that we're marking this year. As I mentioned on Yom Kippur, it's the 80th anniversary of the Danish boat rescue of Jews, also the 80th of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, 30 years since Oslo, 60 years since the March on Washington, also the JFK assassination. A lot has happened this year. And of course, I also mentioned that this year is 50 years since the Yom Kippur War, which we marked on Yom Kippur itself. And then yesterday, October 6th, was the secular anniversary of the attack by the Syrians and the Egyptians on Israel. That was so devastating that took the lives of 2,600 Israelis, thousands of Arabs in Syria and in Sinai and other places, and changed the way that Israel views itself and that the world views Israel. The lack of preparedness in that moment, the intelligence failures, you heard some of the frustration from those I interviewed as they spoke about, even 50 years later, the trauma that they still carry when thinking about the experience of the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago. Unfortunately, today we have to add another milestone to that list. Because as we learned this morning, there was a brazen and unprecedented attack by Hamas and Islamic Jihad crossing the border from Gaza into Israel. Reports are still coming in. As of now, it sounds like somewhere around 100 dead, 100 Israelis killed, including many civilians, nearly 1,000 wounded. This is the first time that an attack from Gaza has not been simply rocket attacks that often are in the dozens, but thousands of rockets, somewhere between 2,500 and 5,000 rockets fired, reaching Tel Aviv, reaching other places in Israel. Baltimore's sister city of Ashkelon has been hit. My understanding, and I imagine we'll learn more in the coming hours and days, is that there are Israelis being held hostage in towns close to Gaza by Hamas terrorists. There is not yet, as far as I know, a ground invasion, but we can only imagine one is coming. War is always horrible, sometimes necessary, but knowing this particular government and remembering that this Motzei Shabbos will be the first time since the beginning of the protest that there will not be a protest Saturday night. First time in nearly 40 weeks, I think, because troops are mobilizing. But knowing the particular government in charge, while there'll be solidarity and while the military will do its utmost to respond to the threat, that it's likely to be that there will be additional civilian casualties and there'll be Palestinians who will be killed, some of whom will be killed perhaps unnecessarily, and not just the collateral damage that happens in wars. This is bad. So what do we do with it? What do we do with the fact that on this Zman Simchatenu, time of our joy, we're now confronted not with Melchemet Yom Kippur, but Melchemet Shemini Atzeret, a day that will live in infamy as yet another example of the trauma that our people have endured within our national homeland long before that and beyond. There aren't simple answers. I don't have simple answers for you today. But I think it has something to do with acknowledging the pain we feel individually, acknowledging the loss and the concern and the anxiety we feel as a community, and understanding that we're part of a people, 7 million of whom live within the land of Israel and are suffering right now. I mentioned a bunch of milestones. One milestone which I think has passed largely unnoticed because of the others is that this fall marks 50 years since the publication of a very important Jewish book called the Jewish Catalog. Raise your hand if you have heard of the Jewish Catalog. Raise your hand if you have a copy of the Jewish Catalog. Great. Here's mine. I have all three. But the original one came out in fall of 1973. I want to read you what the Jewish Catalog has to say about Shemini Atzeret. This is a holiday in itself, although its contemporary function is unclear. It is essentially a conclusion and is primarily marked by the insertion of the prayer for rain, Tfilat Geshem, as this is the beginning of the season which determines the fertility of the land in the year to come. Geshem is recited in the manner of a supplication. Having lived through the past year, we are able to rejoice. About to live another, we already face the fear and uncertainty and hopes which the future engenders. Shemini Atzeret, says the Jewish Catalog, which placed Jewish tradition and practice, Jewish agency into the hands of thousands of Jews over generations. It tells us that today is about rain. Would that we could just focus on our prayer for rain in Israel and not the missiles raining down. Would that we could think only about, God willing, the bounty of the land that will come through the agricultural cycles and not the loss of life, the violence, the trauma that adds to the trauma. Kohelet, who we'll be hearing from in a little while, says one generation comes and another one goes, and the land still endures. I believe that it will. The land will endure. The people will endure. We will somehow move through this moment, but it will not be without a price. It has already been with too much of a price. The Jewish Catalog also has something to say about Yizkor. Here's what it adds. In addition to the yahrzeit, the dead are remembered throughout the Jewish calendar at the festival times. The short Yizkor service, which takes place right after the Haftorah, is recited on Yom Kippur, Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day of Pesach, and the 2nd day of Shavuot. The juxtaposition of Yizkor with the three joyous festivals is very characteristic of Judaism's attitude toward life. The happy and the sad are both integral parts of living, and therefore, Yizkor is made a part of the service of the festivals. The happy and sad are both integral parts of living. And so somehow we absorb them and we live in the tension between them. The genius, my friends, of the Jewish Catalog is that it democratized Jewish learning and practice. It was written by lay people for the most part and for lay people. Although many of its contributors went on to become some of the past 50 years' most important Jewish leaders and teachers. Names, if you look at the table of contents, like Rachel Adler and Debbie Lipstadt, and Herschel Matt, and Zalman Schachter, and Arthur Green, and Art Waskow, and more. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Jewish Catalog is that it borrows from the popular Whole Earth Catalog, which was popular at the time. It uplifted the dual values within the Whole Earth Catalog of individual autonomy and communal responsibility. these were also values that were very much existing within the nascent Chavurah movement, which birthed the catalog and which endures very much to this day, but equally importantly influenced generations of Jewish leaders and the way that synagogues do business. I was a student of Rabbi Harold Schulweis when I was living in LA, and Rabbi Schulweis's genius was in saying the Chavurah movement is an amazing thing. We ought to be doing that in congregations. Let's form Chavurot of our own. We have groups within Beth Am, circles, and other affinity groups. Those are all inspired by the Chavurah movement, which was inspired again by the resources gifted to them through this incredible work of literature. So I want to conclude as we move into Yizkor on those values, those not dueling, but values and tension of individual autonomy and communal responsibility, because I think they also underlie the Yizkor experience. Yizkor is about the individual claim of memory on us. It's about our particular relationships with people who touched our lives, with our parents, with our partners, with our siblings, with some of us, our children. Some of us remember aunts and uncles and cousins. Some of us recall grandparents. Some of us recall good friends. We bring individually those relationships and the memory of those relationships into our experience of Yizkor. But Yizkor is also about the communal experience of grief. Yes, we light a yahrzeit candle at home before Yontif, but then we come to shul and we stand together. We each remember someone. Those of us who don't stand in solidarity, we lift each other up. We hold each other up. We recognize that life is not meant to be lived alone, and grief is impossible to go through alone. So as we move into our Yizkor service, Chevra, we'll be within the memory of our loved ones. We'll stand within the Sukkah on this day of Shemini Atzeret, of this Kila Kedoshah, this sacred community. And we'll stand in solidarity with our brethren thousands of miles away on the other side of an ocean who are at this very moment contending with what it will mean to bury their dead, to nurse their wounded back to health, to defend the land. We grieve for them. We grieve for the Israeli people. We grieve for the Palestinian people whose lives have been enmeshed in this horrible conflict for 75 years and more. And we pray as we rise for Yizkor, for a better tomorrow. Please rise.